Well, there was a boss that decided to have a Christmas party for his employees, and he invited the employees to bring their families, spouses, and their kids. And so there were a group of about 20 people that showed up for this Christmas dinner. And the boss was sitting about halfway in the middle of this long dining room table, and right across from him was a little 3-year-old, one of the other parents, little 3-year-old girl. And he noticed that while everybody else was eating, she wasn't eating. And instead, she was looking directly at him, almost kind of just staring at him. And at first, he didn't think much of it, but as time went on, it became sort of obvious to everybody else that she was looking at him, and people were wondering why. And so he thought, well, maybe there's something wrong with my hair. He patted down his hair, and he thought maybe he had some food on his face, and he got his napkin and wiped his face. She just kept staring. He cleaned his glasses, and she kept staring. He looked down, and his buttons were all buttoned, and he finally just kind of became exasperated by this. And he said, now, little girl, what is your name? And she said, my name is Shelley. Now, Shelley, I've noticed, and everybody else got real quiet because they'd noticed this too. Shelley, I noticed that you kept looking at me this whole time we were having dinner. I said, why is that? She said, well, I'm waiting to see how you drink like a fish. Not exactly the kind of Christmas dinner he envisioned. I mentioned the difficulty of raising kids when they're teenagers. One of my favorite parenting quotes is from Mark Twain, where he was asked, Mr. Twain, what advice would you have for raising my teenage son? He thought for a moment. He said, well, I suggest that when your son is 15 years old, that you put him in a whiskey barrel and you hammer the lid shut and feed him through a little hole in the side. The person was kind of like, ugh. And he said, when your son turns 16, plug the hole. Now, this is part 3 of a message that we've been doing on parenting. I call it Parenting 101. It's kind of the 3 basic things that hopefully that every parent sort of has as their mind around and sort of their aim of what they're trying to do. Week 1, we looked at Parent Meet Your Child, and this is sort of a look at what's in your children's human nature of which you are going to find yourself battling, and what can be done about it. This helps us understand our kids. Now, when we all have little kids, and they're about 1 year old and maybe up to 2, they're so sweet and cuddly, and you can't imagine they would ever need discipline. Just wait a few months or years, or at least until they're teenagers, and you realize that you are dealing with a creature who has some element of sweetness to them, but there's some element of something else to it the Bible calls folly. And that's what we are trying to address. The second message we looked at was about training kids in terms of their actions and trying to shape behavior, what they do. And the idea here is that every kid needs to learn self-restraint on their actions. We can't just let them do whatever they want to do and expect it to go well. That doesn't work when they're adults. And so the idea is to train them now as early as they can within the confines of the safety of your home and love of your home, so that when they get out on their own, they're not just these wild stallions doing what they think they should do. And today we look at the third part of this, and this is teaching kids respect. Last week was teaching kids about their actions and their behavior. Today is the more daunting task of teaching kids about their attitudes. Oh joy, oh joy. This is a long, long horse ride. Well, we looked at 3 tasks, full tasks of parenting. The first is love, and our culture basically said this is all that you need. If you just love your kids unconditionally, then they're going to turn out right. That's the message that keeps coming through the culture, and that is a very bad assumption. There is something like, as we looked at in message number 1, that needs training. And then the second is discipline, and we looked at this last week especially. And discipline is something that our culture, in some parts, is just, this is like nails on a chalkboard. It's just like, oh, I don't want to hear about this. But the Bible gives a number of different warnings about discipline. Now, there are some verses that are not in your handout. If you want to look, do some more study, jot these references down. Proverbs 13:24. Proverbs 13:24. Whoever spares the rod hates their children, but to one who loves their children is careful to discipline them. Now, this goes against the grain of our culture. We're kind of like, oh my gosh, are you kidding? But it's an important warning. It's sort of a wake-up call to what we're trying to deal with. Proverbs 19:18, another verse, discipline your children, for in that there is hope. Do not be a willing party to their death. Now, in the Bible, death usually has two meanings to it, the physical death, but also the sort of the loss of real life. In other words, making a mess of yourself is this. And the idea here is that children need to learn restraint. There was a Chicago judge who years ago was asked about the teenagers that he had sent to juvenile hall, juvie, and he said that 97% of mothers that he sent to juvenile hall, 97% had not disciplined their children. And 98% that he'd sent to juvenile hall had not disciplined their children. This is important. And the third task of parenting is building wisdom. In our current culture, secular culture, the lesson we keep hearing is all they need is a good education. And there's nothing wrong with a good education, that's important. But a good education without wisdom means you have a much smarter fool on your hands. And there are people who are very, very smart and intelligent who make wrecks of their life unless they have wisdom. It is foolish to let children sort of learn on their own without any shaping influence from your part. And part of the reason for that is our culture will not mind if you step back and let them shape your children's values and their friends. Proverbs 22:6 is another verse you can write down. Start children off in the way they should go. When they are old, they will not turn from it. So the idea here is there's intentionality involved in shaping wisdom in your kids. Ephesians 6:4, fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. There's a curriculum. And then Proverbs 29:15 sort of has this element of both discipline and training to it. A rod and a reprimand impart wisdom, but a child left undisciplined disgraces his mother. Again, an 18-month-old, between 1 and 2 is my favorite time of raising our kids. I love that age. It was sweetness and hearts all the time. But about at the age of 22 months old, from our oldest, our life changed. And it changed dramatically. And we got into the terrible twos, and I'm not going to name any names to protect the guilty and the innocent, of which there were none. But, and I'm not telling anything my mother wouldn't tell you about me. But we began to run into attitudes like bossy, argumentative, disobedient, disrespectful, defiance, stubbornness, willfulness. Those are all attitudes that come out through a child. And you can sort of deal with those when they're 2 years old and 3 years old, as we looked at last week and the first week. But unless those things are unchecked, those things become fireworks when they reach teenage years. One of my mentors used to call the teenage years folly on steroids. These are things that have to be dealt with. Well, let's look at honor your father and mother. This is Ephesians 6:2, which is the first commandment with the promise that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Now, this is in actuality the fifth of 10 commandments. And what the commandments were given when Israel had broken out of Egypt. God had released them, and they were starting a new nation. And so these were sort of like the 10 pillars on which their culture was going to be built, their society. And notice what he says in this particular verse. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with the promise. The first 4 did not have a promise to them, but this one did. And here's the promise, that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on earth. Now, what he was saying to the nation is, this element of learning to respect and honor not just parents, but adults in general, is crucial to the ongoing of a culture and a society. Without this, a culture begins to break down. A society begins to break down. If you have any question about this, spend 15 minutes on Twitter. We talk about a divided nation and the way people talk about each other, as if this is just political. It's more than just political. There's a slow lack of respect that's crumbling right before our eyes for authority and even for other adults. And what Moses says here in the fifth commandment is this comes all the way down to where it begins in the home. Training kids how to be respectful to mother and father is where it begins. Well, there are 7 things that I would, if I was starting all over again, that I would want to keep in front of my mind as we were raising our children. Respect must be expected. This is a value that you are trying to train to your children. It's a way of life. It's a way of learning how to restrain their attitudes. Honor is the Greek word that means to esteem or to value. Now, in teaching kids respect, there's both an outer expression of this, which is the easier of the two to do, but there's the inner reality of this, which is much harder to do. The outer expression of this is just learning how to be respectful. Mark 7, 6 and 7 says, Jesus says, this people honors me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And here, this is an example of, as adults, if you have any sense of wisdom about you, you will be respectful to your boss. And you will be respectful to your spouse. And you'll be respectful to your friends and to your in-laws, even when that's difficult. And yet, it's possible on the inside not to have much respect for any of those at all, to harbor something against them, to be critical of the people in your life rather than to honor and respect them. So this is what we're beginning with. Obedience is directed at a child's actions. Honor is directed at his attitudes, his or her attitudes. This is what you're trying to shape. On the inside of your handout, the second element to remember is the power of example. You have to demonstrate a respectful attitude. And by demonstrate, I mean this has to be in you as an example, and what they see in you and hear from you, that what they sense from you and your attitudes towards people. But you also have to learn to teach. No 2-year-old understands what argumentative means. If you try to explain this to them, they're just by the words themselves, or disrespectful, or defiant, or stubborn. No 2-year-old understands. So you have to display this or demonstrate this attitude for them. Well, let's look at Deuteronomy 6. These commandments I give you today are to be upon your hearts. So what he's saying to parents is you're trying to do this job of parenting. You have got to take as first order of business to be about being the person you're expecting your children to be. You have got to demonstrate this in your personal life. It's not enough just to know this in your head, but if they see something different, as they get older, they're going to go, oh yeah, right. Yeah, this is what you say, but this is how you live. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home, when you walk along the road, lie down, and when you get up. So here, the simple question to ask yourself is, when I'm watching the news and my children listen to me, what do they hear in my attitude towards people on the news or people in the news? What attitudes do they pick up from me? Or newscasters? Or when you're driving, what attitudes do they pick up from you? Now, I'm going to tell you, I'm glad I don't have children that are riding in my car now, because this is still a work in progress for yours truly. I had a lady flip me off yesterday, so that was interesting. That wasn't in my sermon notes. I'm not sure why I added that. Maybe I thought it would be an encouragement to some of you. I don't know. Well, Pastor Seth can do that. Maybe there's hope for me. Well, the other thing you see this little 22-month-old or 23-month-old, and they start arguing with you. And as we looked at in the first 2 messages, There's a place where disagreeing is appropriate, as long as it's done agreeably. But there's another place where what's going on is really arguing, and a power struggle here, this goes back to message number 1, is something you do not want to engage in with your kids, because it just reinforces, I am the center of my world. And I do have the power over you even right now. I will tie you up in knots in anger, and delightfully do so, if allowed to continue. And so you have to use your facial expressions and tone of voice. Something like, when you say, I don't have to do what you want me to do, then you put a word to that. Or when you say, well, you shouldn't do that, Mom, you need to do this, you put a word to that. Bossy. And you start to associate a term with an action or external expression and an internal attitude. This is how they start to learn. They're not going to learn just from the word, but they need also to feel that sense of tone and that sense of attitude. Facial expressions, tone of voice demonstrate an attitude, mirror their face and tone, give a visual face and tone. Third, show respect towards people and position. Now, in this world, for about 60 years, our culture has been railing against authority. That happened when I was a teenager. And it's continued down this precipice, which is another reason why our country is where we are today. Authority is a God-given authority, which we've looked at before. And even though you disagree with a particular person who happens to be an authority, and whatever that situation is, the scripture is clear that we still respect authority. You respect the position. So your kids will pick this up from you. If you call somebody in governmental office an idiot, or if you call a policeman an idiot, or your boss, or your pastor, thank you. Then you are training them in what's real. We may say that respect is important, but what's real is what they see mom and dad do in their attitudes. 1 Peter 2 says, show proper respect to everyone. Now, does that mean everybody lives lives that's worthy of respect? Of course not. But what he's saying here is you go back to the very beginning that people matter to God. Everybody is made in the image of God. And because everybody is made in the image of God, just that fact alone means they are worthy of respect. Now, if somebody does something heinous, then wisdom is needed on top of that in how to deal with somebody, how to relate to somebody. People that do bad things or things they shouldn't do or cross boundaries, you need wisdom on here. But the foundation that your children need to learn is that people are different than animals. There's something fundamentally important about them. And then in a marriage, respect is also important. Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives. Treat them with respect. Yeah, he's talking about the position of wife, not the person of wife. There needs to be a foundation of, this is what I'm learning, how to respect somebody in this position. If I'm a husband, respecting my wife. So what do your children learn? When your wife has different ideas about the budget or where we're going to go on vacation or what our schedule is going to be, then it's important that your children see that how you relate to your wife is, well, this seems important. You tell me more about that. You are respecting someone's ideas, in this case, your wife's ideas, even the Megan. It's good to see you. That your children see that you may not agree with what your wife wants to do with the budget or what you're going to do with your schedule, but they do need to see that you value what she's saying. And the same is true, wives for husbands. Ephesians 5:33, the wife must respect her husband. Philippians 4:9, what you've learned and received and heard and seen in me, do, and the God of peace will be with you. It's the principle of example. Show respect toward people in position. Number 4, painful consequences when disrespectful. You can appeal to your children when they're in the midst of rebellion and disobedience and they're being stubborn. You can appeal to them with all different kinds of appeals. But there comes a point where no appeal finally works. And what you're trying to demonstrate is if you act like this with this kind of attitude, as you get older, you're going to find this a very painful world. A coach will cut you off of the team. A teacher will have you come in on Saturdays for about 4 hours from 8 to 12. You have to get up early. You may get laid off from work. There are lots of things that can happen if there's not respect that children learn. In our household, we did a simple thing. If you continue to be disrespectful, you are choosing a spanking. Now, if you have questions about spanking, go to the message from 2 weeks ago. Spanking does not have to be done in anger. It should not be done in anger. Spanking needs to be something very thoughtful and intentional and done with patience. In 1 Samuel 3, Eli had 4 sons, and he did not restrain his sons like he should. Verse 13 says, "For I told him I would judge his family forever because of the sin he knew about. His sons made themselves contemptible, and he failed to restrain them." Now, one of the reasons why we fail to restrain our children, particularly in this time, as I observe families, is we are so addicted to their affection. Or the flip side of that same coin is, this is being a mom or being a dad is what validates me. And what's important toward that is they've got to like me. You are not going to discipline your kids or train them very well in wisdom as long as those things are part and parcel of what really is true about you. There's nothing wrong with your kids loving you and liking you. There's nothing. It's delightful when that happens. But you can't discipline with wisdom if that's the primary thing that's going on in your heart, or if their response is crucial to your sense of validation. That they will have it over you and you will lose this particular battle. 5 is the importance of an ear. You want to lend it. He who answers before listening, it is his folly and shame. So if I think for most kids, if you can at least teach them the value of listening to people who are in authority, listening to adults, not interrupting, not arguing right off the bat, but listening until someone is finished. It can be mom or dad. And then if they disagree, fine, they can do that. But what Proverbs says here is if I allow a child to continue to interrupt me, the results in the real world are folly and shame. In other words, they're going to display their foolishness and it's going to come back to haunt them. The importance of the ear in terms of respect. Number 6, on the back of your handout, confess when you're wrong. There are going to be times when you make a mess and you go back and you have to ask forgiveness. In the early years of our church, when we first moved here to start the church, my 2 older were 4 and 2. And we were in the middle of the toddler, terrible twos. And there were plenty of Sunday mornings when we're singing songs, and this is before we had a building, when I would have to, while we're singing songs, excuse myself and go find my kids in the classes and ask them to come over and say, "Daddy was harsh with you this morning. That was wrong. Would you forgive me?" Of course, they were delighted to hear those words. "Sure, Daddy, yeah, we forgive you," you know. But that's important because you're training them when they have a bad attitude towards somebody. This is just what you do. You humble yourself and you go back and ask forgiveness for being disrespectful. Humble yourselves, therefore, under God's mighty hand that he may lift you up in due time. And then the last thing is tell the benefits of respect. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, that it may go well with you and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. So the idea here is what he's trying to do for us parents is to give our kids a vision. When you get out in the real world at age 18 or age 22, this is how life works. And the people that are respectful and have learned to respect authority and to respect people in general, life generally goes better for you when you do that. But there's also one other thing that happens, and that is people respect you. If you learn to be respectful to other people, eventually you have the enjoyment of people who respect you, who like being your friend, who like being with you, who like doing life with you, who like to have lunch together or breakfast or go out on the weekends to see a movie. The opposite of this, when it's on steroids, is you end up with the wrong type of people who reinforce the wrong kinds of things, and it usually doesn't go well for those folks. They have to learn these lessons the hard way. The attitude is a key component to living a full, satisfying life. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I wanted to read something Paul Harvey had written, and I didn't. I forgot to type it out, and so I still have this, and I want to end this message with this. And what strikes me about his words here, Paul Harvey was a fellow that, a radio personality that I sort of grew up with. My parents really kind of grew up with. And it's sort of you'll see a very different sort of frame of reference about parenting than you sort of get in our current culture about parenting. In our current culture, what I see a lot of is we are trying to make life perfect for our children. We are trying to protect them from every kind of thing that could go wrong. There's an element where that's part of your parenting. That's part of what you're supposed to do. But there's another element here that's not really training children for the real world they're going to enter, a fallen world. So you'll sort of get this vibe in this. Paul Harvey writes, "We tried so hard to make things better for our kids that we made them worse. For my grandchildren, I'd like better. I'd really like for them to know about hand-me-down clothes, homemade ice cream, and leftover meatloaf sandwiches." You start to pick up the vibe here? Things don't have to be perfect as a parent. I hope you will learn humility, this is to his grandchildren, by being humiliated. And that you learn honesty by being cheated. I hope you learn to make your own bed, mow the lawn, and wash the car. I hope nobody gives you a brand new car when you are 16. I hope you have to share a bedroom with your younger brother or sister. I hope you have to walk uphill to school with your friends. I hope you don't ask your mom to drop you 2 blocks away so that you won't have to be seen with someone as uncool as your mother. I hope that when you talk back to your mother that you learn what Ivory soap tastes like. I know what Ivory soap tastes like. I've learned that a few times. I sure hope you take time to sit on a porch with your grandma and grandpa and go fishing with your uncle. He's talking about something that what we value, that we esteem. This is what we're trying to teach our children, something outside of them. I hope your mother punishes you when you throw a baseball through your neighbor's window, and that she hugs you and kisses you at Christmas time when you give her a plaster mold of your hand. These things I wish for you: tough times and disappointment, hard work, happiness, respect, that you may appreciate life. Let's pray together. Father, as Lance mentioned earlier, there is very few things in life that are as hard as parenting, trying to shape a child or a teenager's human nature, helping them learn how to restrain their actions and how to restrain their attitudes and not just restrain bad attitudes, but to nurture good attitudes, to value and esteem the right things, and for them to find expression in how they live and the mood of which they portray to other people. Help us to have wisdom for this. This is a long journey that lasts longer than just 18 years or 22 years. But all of our life, we are in the shaping business, the loving and giving wisdom business. And help us with that. Help give us eyes to see what's going on with our children and how we should respond. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.